Hello and welcome to a special broadcast, Newsline Plus at the Raisina Dialogue. It's been a year of the Ukraine-Russia war. What does this say about the humanitarian crisis and the new international order emerging? At the Raisina Dialogue, this has been a bone of contention just a day after the G20 foreign ministers met here without a consensus on Ukraine. And today we have a special guest here. Right now is joining us is Vlada Galan. Vlada, I want to begin by asking you, you are here at the Raisina 2023. What do you think about this particular platform as a common force of global conversations, a common focal point where global leaders are converging to discuss? Do you think a consensus perhaps could emerge?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here. The Raisina Dialogues is an incredible forum that allows for international participation. I'm not sure that a consensus can be reached here. It's a much more complicated, difficult conflict, and I know it firsthand as my father is currently serving, among other civilians, in Ukraine. But I will say that it was really difficult to see Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov here. It was quite difficult to see that he's being allowed on an international stage and continues to be allowed on an international stage. Currently, we have about 65,000 suspected war crimes that have been opened up by the European Justice Commissioner, and this is really troubling. What's happening in my country is one of the largest humanitarian crises that Europe has seen since World War II, and I found that to be a shame. However, I will say that India is in a special position right now to be able to be a broker of peace if they wanted to.
Well, that was going to be my next question. You've seen how G20 is being hosted by India this time around, and we've seen the G20 foreign ministers meeting here without a consensus, of course, on Ukraine. How do you see India, as a converging place of not just foreign ministers but other global leaders as well, particularly at a time of such a magnitude of war for over a year? You were here last year, and you're here again speaking at the Raisina. How do you see New Delhi's role for peace amidst this war?
I think what's happened during this war is when we were here last year in April, the war had just started. It was just a few months into a conflict that I don't think ever could have imagined would have reached the 1 year mark. But last week marked the 1 year anniversary of the war in Ukraine. And here we are again. India finds itself in a unique position. It's a much more trusted stakeholder than China to negotiate peace on both sides. So India can absolutely step up to the plate. I think that in the last year, India could have played a much larger role, but the opportunity is absolutely still there for India to come to the plate, engage both sides. They are much more trusted by the United States than, let's say, a China. So India finds itself in a unique opportunity, and I certainly hope coming out of these dialogues, coming out of the G20, I certainly hope that India will reassert its place in the world as a peacemaker.
Do you also feel that India has a very unique place? Because from the beginning of the war, India has been asking for negotiations and peace. Not just that, Prime Minister Modi has been speaking to all three, Biden, Zelensky, and Putin time and again, and perhaps shares the same kind of trust from all three sides.
This is exactly why India is in a perfectly placed position, because, as I said, it's much more trusted by the United States than China. It would be the U.S. would be very skeptical that if China engaged in an absolute, all-out peace negotiation. I think there would be a little bit of distrust. While it would be somewhat welcome, it would also be somewhat unwelcome. The U.S. is also doesn't have the desire to see China taking a new role in the world. That's the last thing they probably want to see. But India has this unique opportunity. But in order for a peaceful solution to take place, it is going to involve two heads of state coming together. And that means President Zelensky and President Putin have to come face to face for a real opportunity of a peace talk to take place. And the role that India could play is being and bartering that agreement between the two of them. Those two nations and those two states cannot come together without friendly allies backing them up in this process. Perhaps on the Ukrainian side, you would see the United States. You would see India brokering between Ukraine and Russia. And on the Russian side, I don't know, you might see China. China might also kind of play the middle role there. And only when that takes place, I believe there can be a real serious talk about a solution, which I hope for the sake of all Ukrainians suffering in my country right now will be soon.
Well, let's get back to what's been happening in Ukraine. There's been a massive humanitarian crisis. The industry has been completely shattered and decimated. How do you think that Ukraine will share this burden of reconstruction? How will it finance the entire reconstruction after the war?
The damage in Ukraine is in the billions and billions and billions of dollars. And at the end of the day, we need every nation, and especially the Western nations, to come forward and help us refinance that effort. We have to rebuild Ukraine together. We are not fighting a war just for Ukraine. We are fighting a war of freedom for the world. And the question that even countries like India have to ask themselves is, are you on the side of freedom? Which side are you actually on? And really, in this war, we're fighting for freedom. This morning, United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke, and he made a statement that if we allow Russia to get away with this, what does this say to every other aggressor out there? That the door is open to engage in this kind of action. We have to put a stop to it, and we have to do it now.
Let me be a devil's advocate and ask you about American policy. History tells us that US has always fought for themselves and not for anyone else. But here, they are helping out Ukraine. But does Ukraine really believe that US at a certain point of time will actually join the war?
Listen, no matter which way that you look at this argument, it's very clear that right now the U.S. is using less than 10% of its defense budget. I believe the number is somewhere around 5.6%. That was the number at the end of last year. They are using a very small percentage of their defense budget, and at the same time, they're annihilating Russia's army by helping support Ukraine. So you cannot say that the U.S. doesn't have a win here. For the world, it's a win for freedom. For the U.S., it's attacking an adversary and demilitarizing and helping to demilitarize an adversary. You cannot say that there's not a benefit for the U.S. here. Certainly, there is a huge benefit, and the Russians will tell you that U.S. has already joined the war by doing this. There are no U.S. Official U.S. military soldiers on the ground in Ukraine, but a lot of people see the viewing of such large masses of aid as United States intervention already. But either way, Ukraine needs weapons to continue, and we're not going to win this war with pitchforks.
Well, what can you tell us for people who haven't seen, apart from the media coverage or what's been, available on social media, what's been happening at present? It's almost a stalemate situation at the war. What can you tell us from on ground in Ukraine? What's the ground situation?
Well, I was just in Ukraine last week. I left on Friday. And I will tell you that martial law starts at 11. It's not peaceful. I was in Kiev, and I felt the ground shaking in my apartment as I sat in a closet and wondered if I should go underground to take shelter. The situation, the Ukrainians are trying to make ground in Bakhmut. There's a lot of movement on the ground, but the Ukrainians need more weapons. They need support. They're outnumbered. Ukrainian soldiers are outnumbered by Russian soldiers. It is a huge challenge and a difficulty right now for Ukraine. And the mood of the Ukrainian people, however, encourages me every day. It is unwavering. And the Ukrainian people continue. Even the suit that I'm wearing today was sewn by a tailor in the hero city of Irpin that was occupied by the Russians. And the tailor sent the suit out of Ukraine to the border so I can come here today. And her studio had missiles flying from every side over the last 6-8 months. And it's people like her that give us courage, because they're back. They're working in their hometowns, and they're not letting Russia push them out. They're not letting their spirit be broken. And there is a general sense that we can actually win this war. We are David against Goliath, but we can win.
Last two questions, Vlada. I want to ask you about Zelensky's statement, where he said that if Ukraine loses the war, then perhaps Russia could proceed and enter other NATO countries as well. Is this a veiled threat for US and NATO to bring boots on the ground and actually join the war?
Russia is absolutely has imperialistic ambitions. They always have, and it's just in the nature, and Putin always will. If we do not stop Russia in Ukraine, of course they will continue onward. It takes nothing for them to expand further into Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. Where does it end? Where did Hitler end? And we're seeing a lot of those parallels right now. So it's very, very important that we stop Russia now. And the U.S. understands the importance of this. I think the globe understands the importance of this. This threat is very, very, very real. And we don't want to see what happens next.
You know, we've seen what happened in Afghanistan. It's been an endless war from one nation to other, entering, and the country has been ravaged completely. Where do you see the Russia-Ukraine war ending? Or perhaps what is the end game for Russia here?
As I said originally, I think that it means two heads of states have to come and sit together to find a solution. Until President Zelensky and President Putin sit down and engage in a proper dialogue with some countries brokering the peace, you cannot continue to engage through diplomatic envoys. Those envoys do not have the power or the authority to be able to negotiate on behalf of peace. They have a stopping point, and they cannot lay everything on the table. And there also has to be a complete and total ceasefire for there to be any sort of dialogues to take place. This is really critical right now.
Well, Radha, here's hoping that there is a ceasefire and that ceasefire leads to a dialogue and a permanent peace. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.